Discipline Priests can provide healing to their allies through damage dealt. While this healing specialization can be one of the most challenging overall, in smaller group content like dungeons, it's actually quite simple, which is really good for getting started and trying it out. First off, we need to talk about Atonement. A majority of our healing spells apply Atonement to our targets for 15 seconds. Whenever we deal damage with our spells to an enemy, all targets with Atonement are then healed for a portion of the damage done. The gameplay cycle with Discipline Priest and Atonement basically comes down to apply Atonements, then deal damage to enemy targets, and then repeat. And then next up, we're going to go ahead and break our spells down into different categories and talk about them. So first off, applying Atonement. The ways that we apply Atonement are through spells like Power Word Shield, Flash Heal, Renew, and Power Word Radiance. Power Word Shield is a very short cooldown that just applies an absorb shield to our target, and it gives them Atonement for 15 seconds. Then we have Flash Heal. This is just a single target heal on a target, and it will also apply Atonement. Then we also have Renew. Renew is very similar to Flash Heal in that it applies Atonement in a very similar way. So when raiding, we usually apply Atonement with either Flash Heal or Renew based on which costs less mana. But in Mythic Plus dungeons, we're going to generally use Flash Heal. Power Word Radiance is a spell that applies Atonement to the target that we cast it on and also 4 nearby targets, and also does a large burst of healing to each of those targets. Then next up we have, for our spell categories, we have our damage spells, and this is how we heal with Atonement. So after we've applied those Atonement spells, we can then use these in order to heal those players with Atonement. So we have Mind Blast, Penance, Smite, and Halo. Mind Blast is going to be about a 18 or 20 second cooldown. When we use it on our target, it's going to give them this debuff called Schism, which increases all the damage they take from us for 8 seconds. So the general idea is that we're throwing Mind Blast out on our enemy target and then trying to deal as much damage to that target as possible in that window of Schism that we have. Then next up we have Penance, which is also a short cooldown, and it's going to launch a volley of bolts that deal a large amount of damage, and we can target enemies or allies with this. So it can be either a good damage spell to throw out on an enemy, or say you need to do some tank healing or individual single target healing. Penance is a great spell to cast at an ally to do a large amount of healing. Then we have Smite, which is just our spammable cast. So basically, whenever Mind Blast and Penance are on cooldown, we then just spam Smite continuously to keep dealing damage while those cooldowns refresh. And then lastly, just a quick word about Halo. Halo is a long cooldown, but does a very large amount of damage and healing around us. It's going to look similar to this. It's going to throw out a large ring and just hit everything, all enemies for damage and all allies for a large amount of healing. And then it doubles down on that healing because it's hitting enemies. So then if we have atonements out, it's also going to heal those atonements while also healing those players at the same time. So it's a very, very powerful spell. While it does shoot out a giant ring, it will only hit enemies that you're in combat with. So say I'm only in combat with these 3 enemies right here and I press Halo, it will not hit the enemies that are off to the sides over here unless they're actively in combat with us. So you don't have to worry about it like pulling mobs off to the side and whatnot. Okay, then next up we have our cooldown abilities. This is going to be Rapture, Shadow Fiend, and Evangelism. So Rapture is going to apply Power Word Shield to our target. And then our next 3 Power Word Shields have no cooldown and absorb additional damage. It's a really cool and good cooldown to use if you're just wanting to apply absorb shields to the party before damage comes out. And then next up we have Shadow Fiend. This is a pretty short cooldown ability that we use on an enemy, and it just deals a consistent amount of damage to them while also changing a couple of our spells into shadow spells that deal extra damage instead of holy spells. So this would be like Penance and Halo. And then lastly, for our cooldowns, we have Evangelism. We usually only take this when we're doing raid content, but Evangelism will essentially extend the duration of all of our atonements that are active. So we apply a bunch of atonements, and then we press Evangelism, and then we do damage. Then lastly, for our last little category of spells, we have utility spells. This is going to be Pain Suppression, Purify, and Mass Dispel. So Pain Suppression is our external cooldown. This we use on a player, and it's going to reduce the damage that they take by 40% for 8 seconds. This is one of the strongest externals in the game. It's very, very powerful, but it does have a very long cooldown at 3 minutes. Then we have Purify. This is our Dispel effect that we have as a healer. Again, all healers have different versions of a Dispel in terms of what debuffs they can remove from players. For Priest, this is magic, and then we can talent into our improved Dispel right underneath it, and then it will also remove diseases on top of that. Then lastly, for our utility spells, we have Mass Dispel. Mass Dispel is a big AoE effect that we can target on the ground, and it will remove magic debuffs from both allies and enemies within the radius of the Mass Dispel. So this is great if you have a bunch of debuffs out, specifically magic debuffs out on allies nearby. You can just throw Mass Dispel out on top of them and get rid of all of those debuffs at the same time. All right, and then now we're going to go over a bit of our rotation, essentially. So really the rotation, like I mentioned with the gameplay cycle, the idea is that we apply atonements to our allies, and then we deal as much damage as we can within that window of time that we have our atonements active to an enemy target, and then we repeat the process. So in dungeon content, this is really just going to come down to using Power Word Radiance to apply atonements to pretty much everyone. What I generally like to do is I like to stand in the middle of my tanks and DPS. So say the range DPS are over here, like on this X marker, and then the tank is up here fighting the mobs. I usually will position myself somewhere in the middle, and then that way I can just target myself with Power Word Radiance, and it will reach both the tank and the range DPS. It has a pretty far radius, so you can also target other players, like if you notice the tank around or close enough to the other players. So then after we apply Atonement, either through Power Word Radiance for AoE healing, or we can also individually apply it with things like Flash Heal and Power Word Shield. Power Word Shield's great to use pretty much on cooldown on the tank for some good absorb and refreshing of Atonement. Then after we apply those Atonements, so here on this Hunter, I'm just going to keep my Atonements refreshed. Then what we're going to do is our damage spells, which the rotation is basically just Mind Blast, Penance, and then spam Smite. Then with an ability like Halo, because it's a long 1-minute cooldown, we can kind of just use that when we have it available. I usually try to combine it with Shadow Fiend because you get that upgraded version where it does shadow damage instead of holy damage. So for instance, we're going to use, we'll incorporate our cooldown Shadow Fiend into this. So I apply Atonements, then I'm going to press Shadow Fiend, Mind Blast, Penance, Spam Smite. And then we can throw in a Halo either before or after, just anytime during it. We Penance again because it's up. We go back to spamming Smite. And then we just repeat this gameplay as needed. So then say we go into a new pack or our atonements start running low eventually on some players, We reapply those atonements, maybe press a Power Word Radiance, then Mind Blast, Penance, spam Smite. And that is essentially the entire gameplay loop in Dungeons. So I think that pretty much covers everything. In my last beginner's guide for Disc Priest in Dragonflight, I actually covered more in detail like how ramping works and all this stuff. But because ramping changes so frequently, patch to patch, I'm actually gonna do that as a separate individual video of covering how to ramp in each major patch cycle. So the beginner's guide is just going over pretty much what our spells do and how to use them at a base level, and then the ramp is going to go over more like raid gameplay and doing that kind of stuff. And the plan is to update that with every major patch cycle, so season 1, season 2, etc. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful, and I will see you in the next one.